There is an island in the Venetian lagoon that the world has tried, again and again, to erase. It sits just beyond the reach of the city's golden light, shrouded in a perpetual mist that seems to cling to its crumbling stones and twisted trees. The locals call it Poveglia, but most refuse to speak its name aloud. Fishermen steer their boats wide of its shores, and even the most daring thrill-seekers hesitate at the thought of setting foot on its cursed soil. For centuries, Poveglia has been a place of exile, a dumping ground for the unwanted, the diseased, and the damned, a place where the living once sent their dead, and where the dead, some say, have never truly left. Imagine standing at the edge of the lagoon as dusk falls, the city of Venice behind you, its laughter and music fading into the distance. Ahead, the silhouette of Poveglia rises from the water, its bell tower a broken finger pointing accusingly. At the sky, the air is thick with the scent of salt and decay. The only sounds are the lapping of water against rotting docks and the distant, mournful cry of a gull. It is a place that feels untouched by time, and yet, beneath its surface, time has not stood still. It has curdled, soured, and festered. What horrors lie buried beneath Poveglia's tangled undergrowth and crumbling ruins? What secrets have been swallowed by its black, marshy soil? The stories whispered in Venice's shadowed alleys speak of mass graves, of plague pits so deep, the earth itself turned black with ash and bone. They speak of madness, of a hospital where the cries of the forgotten echoed through the night, and of a darkness so profound that even the bravest souls who dared to trespass were driven to the brink of terror or worse. Tonight, we will cross the water together. We will peel back the layers of myth and silence, and descend into the heart of Poveglia's forgotten horrors. What you are about to discover may change the way you think about history, about evil, and about the things we choose to bury. Are you ready to remember what the world has tried so hard to forget? Venice, the city of masks and mirrors, floats like a dream upon the water. By day, sunlight glitters on the Grand Canal, illuminating palaces of marble and gold. Gondolas glide beneath bridges arched with centuries of history, their passengers, lost in the romance of a city that seems to defy the very laws of nature. The air is thick with the scent of espresso and the distant echo of Vivaldi's violins. At night, the city transforms lanterns flicker along narrow alleys, casting long shadows on ancient stones. Laughter and music spill from hidden courtyards, and the world feels suspended between reality and fantasy, as if Venice itself is a mask, hiding secrets behind its beauty. But every city casts a shadow, and Venice's is long and dark. Beyond the shimmer of its canals, past the last outposts of civilization, lies a place the city would rather forget: Poveglia. To the untrained eye, it is just another scrap of land. In the lagoon, a cluster of trees and ruins barely visible through the morning mist. But to those who know its story, Poveglia is a wound that never healed a scar on the face of paradise. The island itself is small, barely 17 acres, shaped like a teardrop fallen from the eye of Venice. It sits low in the water, its banks eroded by centuries of neglect. The buildings that remain are little more than skeletons. A bell tower, its bricks crumbling and blackened by time. The shell of a hospital, windows gaping like empty eye sockets, and a scattering of outbuildings, half swallowed by ivy and rot. The trees grow wild here, their roots twisting through the ruins, as if trying to reclaim the land from the memories that haunt it. Poveglia's isolation is absolute. There are no bridges to its shores, no regular ferries or tourist boats. The only way to reach it is by private vessel, and even then, most boatmen will refuse. The Venetian authorities have declared the island off-limits, citing safety concerns, but the real reason is whispered in the city's taverns and markets. Poveglia is cursed. It is a place where the dead outnumber the living, where the soil itself is said to be thick with human ash. Some say that on certain nights, when the fog rolls in and the moon is hidden, you can hear the tolling of a bell that hasn't rung in decades, or see shadows moving among the ruins, watching, waiting. Superstition clings to Poveglia like the mist that shrouds its shores. For generations, Venetians have told stories of fishermen who vanished after casting their nets too close to the island, of children who dared each other to swim to its banks and were never seen again. Some believe the island is haunted by the souls of plague victims, their suffering so great that it left a stain on the land. Others whisper of darker things, of rituals performed in secret, of madness that took root and spread like a contagion, of a darkness that seeps from the ground and infects the mind. Yet, for all its fearsome reputation, Poveglia is not entirely forgotten. Its silhouette is a constant presence on the horizon, a reminder that beneath Venice's beauty lies a history written in blood and silence. The city's artists and poets have long been drawn to the island's mystery, weaving its legends into their work. But even they approach with caution, as if afraid that to look too closely is to invite the island's curse upon themselves. As we stand on the edge of Venice, gazing across the water at Poveglia's shadow, we are confronted with a choice: to turn away, as so many have done, or to look deeper, to seek out the truth hidden beneath the island's haunted surface. 4. In the contrast between Venice's splendor and Poveglia's decay, we find the heart of our story, a tale of beauty and horror, memory and forgetting, light and darkness. And it is only by crossing that threshold, by stepping into the shadow, that we can begin to understand the true nature of the horrors that lie buried on Italy's plague island. In the 14th century, death arrived in Venice not as a shadow, but as a tidal wave. The Black Death swept through Europe with a ferocity that defied comprehension, and the floating city, with its labyrinth of canals and crowded alleys, was especially vulnerable. The plague did not discriminate. It crept into the palaces of the wealthy and the hovels of the poor, leaving behind only silence and the stench of decay. The city's famed beauty became a mask for terror, as gondolas ferried not lovers, but corpses through the winding waterways. Venice, a city built on trade, was a crossroads of the world, and with every ship that docked, the risk of contagion grew. The authorities, desperate to stem the tide of death, turned to the islands scattered across the lagoon. Poveglia, with its isolation and proximity to the city, was chosen as a bulwark against the invisible enemy. What had once been a quiet patch of land became a fortress of the dying. The transformation was swift and merciless. Poveglia was converted into a lazaretto, a quarantine station, where the sick and the suspected were sent to await their fate. The word quarantine itself comes from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. The period ships and their passengers were required to remain isolated before entering the city. But for many, Poveglia was not a place of healing. It was a waiting room for death. Historical records paint a grim picture. Barges loaded with the infected would arrive at the island's makeshift docks, their passengers too weak to stand. Some were carried ashore on stretchers. Others stumbled, delirious, into the arms of masked doctors, whose beaked masks and flowing robes made them look more like harbingers of death than healers. The air was thick with the cries of the dying, and the prayers of those who knew their time was short. The plague did not kill quickly or kindly. It ravaged the body, blackening the skin, swelling the lymph nodes, and filling the lungs with blood. The suffering was unimaginable. One survivor, a merchant named Matteo, left behind a letter that has haunted historians for centuries. "I have seen the eyes of the dying," he wrote, "and in them I saw my own fate. The island is a place of shadows. The priests come to offer comfort, but their words are lost in the wailing. At night the fires burn, and the smoke carries the souls of the dead across the water. I pray for morning, but each dawn brings only more bodies. The dead piled up faster than they could be buried. At first, the authorities tried to maintain order, digging graves and reciting prayers. But as the numbers grew, desperation set in. Mass graves were dug, trenches filled with bodies, layer upon layer, until the earth itself seemed to groan beneath. The weight, the soil turned black with ash and bone. Some say that even today, if you dig deep enough on Poveglia, you will find the remains of those lost centuries ago, skulls gritting up from the darkness, a silent testament to the island's past. The horror did not end with the Black Death. Plague returned to Venice again and again, each wave more devastating than the last. Poveglia became a permanent fixture in the city's battle against disease. In the 17th century, the island was fortified, its buildings expanded to house ever more victims. The sick were brought by the hundreds, sometimes by the thousands, and left to die in isolation. The living feared the island so much that even the mention of its name was enough to send a shiver down the spine. Yet, amid the horror, there were moments of humanity. Some doctors and nurses, risking their own lives, stayed to comfort the dying. Priests offered last rites, their voices trembling as they faced the endless tide of death. There are stories of friendships forged in the shadow of the plague, of small acts of kindness, a cup of water, a whispered prayer that brought a measure of dignity to the condemned. But for most, Poveglia was a place of abandonment. Families were torn apart, loved ones sent to the island with no hope of return. The city's leaders, desperate to protect the living, made impossible choices. The island became a symbol of sacrifice and fear, a place where the line between mercy and cruelty blurred. As the centuries passed, the memory of Poveglia's suffering faded from the city's collective consciousness. The island was left to the elements, its buildings crumbling, its graves untended. But the stories persisted, whispered in the shadows of Venice's alleys. They spoke of restless spirits, of a land so saturated with death that nothing could grow. They spoke of a darkness that lingered long after the last plague victim was laid to rest. To stand on Poveglia today is to feel the weight of that history. Pressing down, to sense the presence of those who came here not by choice, but by necessity. It is to walk on ground that has absorbed centuries of pain, to breathe air heavy with the memory of suffering. The island is a monument to the horrors of the past, a place where death once ruled and where its dominion has never truly ended. As the world staggered into the 20th century, the horrors of plague faded into the realm of legend, but Poveglia's story was far from over. The island, already heavy with the weight of centuries of suffering, was about to become the stage for a new kind of torment, one that would blur the boundaries between science and superstition, sanity and madness. In 1922, the Italian government, seeking to make use of the abandoned island, converted Poveglia's crumbling buildings into a psychiatric hospital. The decision was practical, even logical on paper. The island's isolation made it an ideal place to house those society wished to forget. But for the patients sent to Poveglia, it was less a sanctuary than a sentence. The ferry that carried them across the lagoon might as well have been a hearse, and the hospital's gates, once closed, rarely opened again. The hospital itself was a patchwork of old plague buildings and hastily constructed wards. The walls, already stained by centuries of death, now echoed with new cries not of disease, but of minds unraveling. The staff, overworked and undertrained, struggled to maintain order. The treatments of the era, though cloaked in the language of science, were often little more than acts of desperation. Electroshock therapy, insulin comas, and crude lobotomies were administered with chilling regularity. The line between cure and punishment blurred, and the island's reputation for suffering only deepened. Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Some spoke of a doctor, known only as Il Medico, who became obsessed with the island's dark energy. He was said to conduct experiments in the old bell tower, convinced that the spirits of plague. Victims haunted the hospital, and that only the most extreme measures could drive them out. Patients whispered of midnight screams, of figures moving through the halls when the staff had all gone to bed. Some claimed to see shadowy forms at the foot of their beds, or to hear the tolling of a bell that no longer existed. The line between reality and delusion became impossible to draw. Was the island truly haunted, or were the patients simply driven mad by isolation and fear? The staff, too, began to feel the island's oppressive weight. Nurses reported sudden chills, the sensation of being watched, and the inexplicable urge to flee. Some resigned after only a few weeks, unable to bear the atmosphere of dread that seemed to seep from the very walls. The story of Il Medico reached its grisly climax in the late 1930s. According to legend, the doctor, tormented by guilt, and perhaps by the very spirits he sought to banish, threw himself from the bell tower. Some say he survived the fall, only to be suffocated by a mysterious mist that rose from the ground. Others claim his body was never found, and that his ghost still wanders the ruins, searching for redemption or revenge. The truth, as with so much on Poveglia, is lost to time, but the legend endures. Official records from the hospital are sparse, and those that remain are often contradictory. Some suggest that conditions were no worse than in other asylums of the era, that the stories of abuse and horror are the product of overactive imaginations. But the testimonies of former patients and staff, collected in the years after the hospital's closure, paint a different picture. They speak of overcrowded wards, of patients restrained for days at a time, of treatments administered without consent or understanding. They speak of a place where hope was a foreign concept, and where the only escape was madness or death. The hospital finally closed its doors in 1968. Its buildings left to rot and crumble. The island was abandoned once more, but the stories did not die. Urban explorers who braved the journey to Poveglia in the decades that followed reported finding medical equipment scattered among the ruins, patient records yellowed with age, and graffiti scrawled on the walls, pleas for help, or perhaps warnings to those who might come after. And always there were the ghosts. Visitors spoke of cold spots, of disembodied voices, of doors slamming shut with no wind to move them. Some claimed to see figures in hospital gowns drifting through the corridors, their faces twisted in agony or lost in confusion. The line between history and haunting, between science and superstition, had never been thinner. Poveglia's asylum years are a testament to the dangers of forgetting the past, of allowing places of suffering to fester in silence. The island became a crucible where the failures of medicine and the terrors of the mind were magnified, where the boundary between sanity and madness dissolved in the fog. It is a reminder that horror is not always the product of superstition, that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in the name of progress. As we leave the ruins of the asylum behind, the question lingers: was Poveglia cursed by the ghosts of its past, or by the cruelty of those who sought to cure what they could not understand? The answer, perhaps, is both a legacy of pain that refuses to be forgotten, echoing through the empty halls and across the silent waters of the lagoon. If you ask a Venetian gondolier about Poveglia, you'll see a shadow flicker across his face. He might laugh it off, mutter a prayer, or change the subject entirely. But if you press, if you show you're truly curious, or perhaps foolish, might share one of the island's whispered legends, stories passed from parent to child, from old fisherman to wide-eyed apprentice, each tale darker than the last. The most enduring legend is that of the bell. The bell tower, now a crumbling relic, once stood as the island's lone sentinel, its toll echoing across the lagoon. During the plague years, it rang to mark the passing of the dead, a grim metronome for the endless procession of bodies. But after the last patient died and the hospital closed, the bell was removed, its iron heart silenced forever, or so they say. For on certain nights, when the fog is thick and the moon is hidden, locals claim to hear the bell tolling once more. The sound drifts across the water, low and mournful, as if the island itself is calling out for the souls it can never release. Some say it is a warning, others a lament. But all agree, when the bell tolls, it is best to stay far from Poveglia's shores. Then there is the tale of the doctor, the infamous Il Medico, whose obsession with the island's darkness led to his own undoing. The story goes that he was driven mad by the spirits of those he tormented, haunted by the faces of patients lost to his cruel experiments. One stormy night, unable to bear the weight of his guilt, he climbed the bell tower and threw himself from its heights. Some say he survived the fall, only to be enveloped by a choking mist that rose from the ground, dragging him into the earth. Others claim his ghost still wanders the ruins, his white coat stained with blood, his eyes hollow with regret. Visitors who dare to approach the tower at night report feeling an icy hand on their shoulder, or hearing a voice whispering in their ear pleading, warning, or perhaps cursing those who disturb his restless vigil. But the legends do not end with the doctor. The soil of Poveglia is said to be cursed, saturated with the suffering of thousands. Fishermen tell of nets that come up tangled with bones, of strange lights flickering among the trees, of voices calling from the water. Some believe the island is a gateway, a thin place where the veil between worlds is worn away by centuries of pain. There are stories of children who vanished after daring each other to swim to the island, of lovers who disappeared on moonlit nights, their laughter swallowed by the mist. Even the bravest dogs refused to set paw on Poveglia, howling and cowering at the water's edge. One of the most chilling tales is that of the restless dead. It is said that the spirits of plague victims, denying proper burial and mourning, wander the island in endless procession. On certain nights, witnesses claim to see shadowy figures moving through the ruins, their faces hidden, their footsteps silent. Some are said to reach out to the living, desperate for release, while others are consumed by rage, lashing out at any who trespass. There are accounts of explorers who returned from the island changed, haunted by nightmares, plagued by illness, or driven to madness by visions of the dead. And then there are the stories that defy explanation. The woman in white who appears at the water's edge, weeping for a lost child. The laughter of children echoing through the empty halls of the asylum. The sudden, suffocating sense of dread that descends without warning, as if the island itself is watching, waiting, remembering. These legends are more than just stories. They are warnings woven into the fabric of Venetian life, reminders of the price paid for forgetting the past. They are the island's way of demanding to be remembered, of refusing to let its horrors be buried beneath the tides of time. So, which of these tales chills you the most? Is it the bell that tolls for the forgotten, the doctor's doomed descent, or the restless dead who wander in search of peace? Or perhaps it is the island itself, sense that some places are so saturated with suffering that they can never be cleansed, never be reclaimed. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which legend would keep you awake at night? Which would you dare to face if you found yourself alone on Poveglia, with only the mist and the memories for company? As we move deeper into the island's story, remember, every legend has a kernel of truth, and every truth on Poveglia is more terrifying than fiction. The soil is thick with secrets, and the night is far from over. Despite the warnings, despite the legends, despite the official decrees that mark Poveglia as forbidden ground, There are always those who cannot resist the lure of the unknown. The island's reputation as one of the world's most haunted places has become a siren song for a new breed of adventure paranormal investigators, urban explorers, and thrill seekers drawn not by the promise of treasure, but by the hope of glimpsing the darkness that history has tried to bury. The journey to Poveglia is itself an act of defiance. The Venetian authorities have made it clear the island is off limits, fines are steep, and the threat of arrest is real. Yet, under the cover of night, or in the gray hush of dawn, small boats slip away from the city's edge, their passengers, clutching cameras, recorders, and a nervous sense of anticipation. For some, it is a test of courage. For others, a desperate search for proof that the world is stranger and more haunted than we dare to admit. The first wave of modern explorers arrived in the late 20th century, armed with little more than flashlights and bravado. They found the island in a state of advanced decay. The hospital's walls were crumbling, its floors littered with broken glass and rusted beds. Patient records, scattered and yellowed, whispered of forgotten lives. The bell tower loomed above. It all a silent witness to the trespassers below. It did not take long for the stories to begin. Some explorers reported sudden drops in temperature, pockets of icy air that seemed to move with intent. Others described the overwhelming sensation of being watched, of invisible eyes tracking their every step. There were accounts of doors slamming, shut with no wind to move them, of footsteps echoing in empty corridors, of voices whispering just beyond the reach of understanding. Cameras malfunctioned, batteries drained in minutes, and photographs developed with strange blurs and shadows faces. Where there should have been only darkness, paranormal investigators, eager to document the supernatural, brought more sophisticated equipment: EMF meters, thermal cameras, digital voice recorders. The results were unsettling. Recordings captured disembodied voices' pleas for help, cries of pain, and chillingly, the tolling of a bell that no one could see. Thermal images revealed cold spots in the shape of human figures, standing motionless in the ruins. EMF readings spiked in the old hospital wards, as if the very air was charged with the residue of suffering. One team, led by a seasoned investigator named Alessio, spent a night in the asylum's main hall. They set up motion sensors and infrared cameras, determined to debunk the island's reputation. But as midnight approached, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature plummeted, and a dense fog rolled in from the lagoon, swallowing the island in silence. The team heard footsteps circling their camp, though no one was visible. One member, a skeptic, began to panic, insisting that something was pressing down on his chest, making it impossible to breathe. The group fled before dawn, shaken and silent, their footage later revealing a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, watching them leave. Urban explorers, less interested in ghosts than in the thrill of trespass, have also left their mark on Poveglia. Some have painted graffiti on the hospital walls, messages of defiance, or perhaps warnings to those who follow. Others have taken souvenirs: a rusted scalpel, a fragment of stained glass, a handful of earth from the plague pits. Many report nightmares after their visit streams of drowning, of being buried alive, of wandering endless corridors with no exit. A few have suffered more tangible consequences: sudden illnesses, inexplicable injuries, or a lingering sense of dread that follows them home. The psychological toll of Poveglia is as real as any physical danger. Even the most hardened explorers speak of the island's oppressive atmosphere, the way it seems to amplify fear and despair. Some describe a sense of being unwelcome, as if the island itself is pushing them away. Others feel an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to return despite the terror they experienced. Psychologists who have studied these cases suggest that Poveglia's history, combined with its isolation and decay, creates a perfect storm for the mind, a place where the boundaries between reality and imagination dissolve. Yet, for all the fear, there is also fascination. Videos and photographs from Poveglia circulate online, fueling debates and drawing new generations of seekers. Some viewers are convinced by the evidence of hauntings. Others dismiss it as tricks of the mind or the camera. But all are drawn to the mystery, to the sense that Poveglia is a place where the past refuses to die. Would you dare to set foot on Poveglia, knowing what you know now? Would you spend a night in the asylum, or walk the plague fields in the dark? Share your answer below if you're brave enough. For every story told, there are 100 more left unspoken, waiting for the next visitor to awaken them. The island endures, silent and watchful, its secrets buried but never forgotten. And as long as there are those willing to cross the water, Poveglia's horrors will never truly fade into history. For centuries, Poveglia has been a wound that Venice could not heal, a place so saturated with suffering that even the passage of time could not wash it clean. Yet, as the modern world pressed forward, the city and its authorities began to treat the island not as a scar to be remembered, but as a blemish to be hidden. The story of Poveglia's vanishing is not just about the decay of stone and wood, but about the deliberate erasure of memory, the slow suffocation of truth beneath layers of silence and denial. The first act of erasure was physical. After the asylum closed its doors in 1968, the island was left to rot. The buildings, already battered by centuries of neglect, were abandoned to the elements. Roofs collapsed, walls crumbled, and nature began its slow reclamation. Ivy crept over the hospital's facade, trees burst through the floors, and the once orderly gardens became a tangle of thorns and shadows. The authorities posted signs warning of danger on stable structures, hazardous materials, risk of collapse. But these warnings served a dual purpose. They kept the curious away, and they allowed the city to turn its back on the island's past. Officially, Poveglia became a non-place, a forbidden zone marked on maps, but absent from conversation. The Venetian government imposed strict bans on visitors, threatening heavy fines and even arrest for those who dared to land on its shores. The rationale was always safety, but beneath the surface, there was a deeper motive: to let the island's history fade quietly into oblivion. The stories of plague pits and asylums, of mass graves and restless spirits, were dismissed as superstition or sensationalism. School children learned nothing of Poveglia in their lessons. Tour guides skirted the subject, focusing instead on the city's glories and triumphs. But erasure is never complete. The more the authorities tried to suppress Poveglia's story, the more it seeped into the cracks of collective memory. Locals, especially the older generations, continued to whisper about the island in hushed tones. Fishermen told their apprentices to steer clear of its waters, not just for fear of fines, but because bad luck clung to the place like a second skin. Some Venetians claimed that the city's prosperity was built on a foundation of denial, that the beauty of Venice was only possible because its horrors had been exiled to the lagoon. There were moments when the city's attempts at forgetting faltered. In the early 2000s, rumors spread that the government planned to sell Poveglia to private investors, perhaps to turn it into a luxury resort or a tourist attraction. The proposals sparked outrage and fear. Some saw it as a desecration, a final insult to the memory of those who had suffered and died there. Others worried that opening the island to the public would unleash whatever darkness still lingered in its soil. In the end, the plans fell through, and Poveglia was left to its ghosts once more. The contrast between collective memory and willful forgetting is stark. In the heart of Venice, tourists marvel at the city's resilience, its ability to endure against the odds. But just beyond the city's edge, Poveglia stands as a silent rebuke, a reminder that endurance often comes at a cost. The island's decay is not just the result of neglect, but of a conscious decision to let the past rot away, to bury the truth beneath layers of bureaucracy and indifference. Yet, the island refuses to vanish completely. Its silhouette remains. On the horizon, a dark smudge against the glittering water. Its legends persist, carried on the lips of those who remember. And every so often, a story breaks through the surface of photograph, a whispered warning, a daring investigation reminding the world that some wounds cannot be hidden, no matter how deep they are buried. Poveglia's erasure is a lesson in the dangers of denial. To forget is to invite repetition, to allow old horrors to fester in the dark. The island's silence is not peace, but a kind of suffocation, a warning that history, no matter how painful, demands to be remembered. As we look back across the water, we must ask ourselves, what else have we chosen to forget? And what price will we pay for our silence? Today, Poveglia sits in the lagoon like a wound that refuses to close. The world around it has changed. Venice bustles with tourists, the city's ancient stones polished by centuries of footsteps and laughter. But on Poveglia, time has collapsed in on itself. The island is a mausoleum, a place where the past is not buried, but exposed, raw, and unhealed. Approaching the island, the first thing you notice is the silence. It is not the peaceful hush of a forgotten garden, but a heavy, suffocating quiet, as if the air itself is holding its breath. The water laps against the shore with a dull, listless rhythm. The dock, once a lifeline for the desperate and the dying, is now a skeleton of rotting wood, half swallowed by the tide. Every step onto the island feels like a trespass, an intrusion, into a world that does not want to be disturbed. The ruins rise before you, stark against the gray sky. The bell tower, its bricks blackened by age and fire, leans at a precarious angle, as if bowing under the weight of memory. The hospital's facade is a patchwork of shattered windows and creeping ivy, the doors hanging open like broken jaws. Inside, the corridors are choked with debris-rusted bed frames, splintered doors, the remnants of medical equipment scattered like bones. The walls are scrawled with graffiti, some of it recent, some faded into illegibility, all of it a testament to the restless energy that still haunts these halls. The air is thick with the scent of mold and decay, tinged with something sharper and acrid, metallic tang that lingers at the back of your throat. In the old wards, sunlight filters through the shattered glass, casting fractured patterns on the floor. Every shadow seems to move. Every gust of wind becomes a whisper. It is easy to imagine the cries of the forgotten echoing through the empty rooms, the shuffle of footsteps just out of sight. But the most haunting reminders of Poveglia's past are not the ruins, but the earth itself. The soil is dark and loose, churned by centuries of burials. In some places, bones still surface after heavy rains, fragments of skulls, teeth, the long, pale curve of a femur. Fishermen tell of nets that come up heavy with human remains, relics of the plague years that refused to stay buried. The ground is said to be composed, in part, of human ash, the result of countless bodies burned in desperate attempts to halt the spread of disease. Every step is a reminder that you are walking on the dead. Nature, too, seems uneasy here. The trees grow twisted and gnarled, their roots breaking through the foundations of the old buildings. Birds avoid the island, and even the insects seem fewer, as if life itself hesitates to take hold. The wind carries strange sound snatches of laughter, the distant toll of a bell, the low murmur of voices that fade as soon as you try to listen. Some visitors report sudden chills, the sensation of being watched, or the overwhelming urge to flee. Others speak of a crushing sadness, a grief that settles on the chest and will not lift. Yet amid the decay, there are moments of unexpected beauty. Wildflowers bloom in the cracks of the pavement, their colors vivid against the gray. Sunlight glints off the lagoon, turning the water to silver. For a moment, the island seems almost peaceful, as if it is trying to remember what it was before it became a place of exile and death. But the illusion never lasts. The past is always there, just beneath the surface, waiting to break through. Poveglia is more than a ruin. It is a repository of trauma, a place where the boundaries between history and legend, life and death, are blurred beyond recognition. The island's legacy is not just in its crumbling walls or its unquiet soil, but in the stories that cling to it, the memories of those who suffered, the fears of those who survived, the silence of those who chose to forget. To stand on Poveglia is to confront the unburied past, to feel the weight of centuries pressing down. It is a reminder that some places cannot be cleansed, that some wounds never heal. The island endures, a silent witness to the horrors of history, its secrets waiting for those brave or foolish enough to listen. Standing at the edge of Poveglia's haunted ground, it's impossible not to wonder, why do we bury horrors? Is it to protect ourselves from pain, to shield our children from the darkness, or simply because the truth is too heavy to carry? Across centuries and continents, humanity has always tried to hide its wounds-covering mass graves with wildflowers, sealing asylum doors, letting the ruins of suffering crumble into dust. But what happens when we forget? Does the past truly disappear, or does it fester beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to rise again? Poveglia is a mirror held up to our collective memory. Its silence is not peace, but a warning. The island's history is a tapestry of denial and remembrance, of stories whispered in the dark and truths left to rot in the sun. We bury horrors because we fear them, but in doing so, we risk losing the lessons they offer. The suffering of plague victims, the madness of the asylum, the cruelty of abandonment. These are not just tales of the past, but reflections of what we are capable of, even now. What is the true horror of Poveglia? Is it the restless dead, the cursed soil, the echo of a bell that tolls for the forgotten? Or is it the silence, the deliberate act of turning away, of letting suffering slip into myth and legend, rather than facing it head on? Perhaps the greatest terror is not what happened on the island, but what we allow to happen when we choose to forget. I invite you to reflect. What do you think is the real legacy of Poveglia? Is it a warning, a curse, or a lesson we have yet to learn? Have you ever encountered a place or a story that made you question what should be remembered and what should be left to rest? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's break the silence together and see what truths rise from the shadows when we dare to remember. After all, history is not just what we choose to celebrate, but what we are brave enough to confront. What will you choose to remember? Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of Poveglia, a place where history refuses to stay buried, and every stone whispers of suffering and survival. If you've made it this far, you're not just a spectator. You're a seeker, someone willing to look beneath the surface and confront the darkness that others would rather forget. That takes courage, and it's what sets this community apart. If you found this story haunting, unsettling, or thought-provoking, I invite you to subscribe and become part of our growing circle of explorers. Here, we don't shy away from the uncomfortable truths or the mysteries that linger in the world's forgotten corners. Every week, we dive into another tale that history tried to erase another place where the past still breathes, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Next time, we'll journey to another site of hidden horror, where the line between legend and reality is razor thin, and the echoes of the past are impossible to ignore. If you have a story or a place you want us to explore, leave your suggestions in the comments. Your curiosity shapes the path we take. And now, a final question, one that only the boldest will answer. If you think you could spend a night on Poveglia, surrounded by its ghosts and memories? Let us know below. If you dare, would you face the silence, the shadows, the weight of all that has been buried? Or would you, like so many before, turn away at the last moment? Thank you for watching, for remembering, and for daring to look where others will not. Until next time, stay curious and never stop seeking the stories that the world tries to forget.